Long ago, back in 2003, I was tasked with the opportunity to shoot the war in Iraq. The Allied forces' mission was to facilitate regime collapse and restore freedom to the Iraqi people. That war would become Operation Iraqi Freedom, lasting for almost 9 years and coincide with the war in Afghanistan, the longest war in U.S. history. I am your host, Sean Fairburn. I was a Chief Warrant Officer in the United States Marine Corps. My job was as a combat camera officer, tasked by the Commandant to shoot the war. Making my way down the chain of command to determine the best place to be to accomplish that mission, I decided that the lead ground combat element in the middle of the fighting would be the most logical place to tell the Marine Corps story from the ground. That decision led me to Delta Company, 1st Tank Battalion, Regimental Combat Team 7, 1st Marine Division, 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. I was introduced to then Captain Greg Poland, Commanding Officer of Delta Company, 1st Tanks. This provided me a way to be close to the fighting with tanks. Infantry from Lima Company 3-4 and Charlie Company Combat Engineers. A vantage point of the war that would prove to become historic, as you will see. This will become the foundation of a podcast documentary series that talks with some of the Marines from these units to hear their stories and see where they are now and what God is doing in their lives since coming home from the battlefield. First up, Master Sergeant Michael Mummey, known as Mumbo, a legend in the tank community. Top Mummey was the S4 chief for 1st Tank Battalion. As one of the few Desert Storm Marine tankers that stayed in the Marines, Mumbo brought expertise in tanks and in combat to the units going into battle in 2003, most for the first time. Mike, great to see you.
Great to see you, Sean, and your zany cast of characters that you brought with you.
Indeed,
Slide
indeed.
that lousy animal.
We are going to be traveling this country to visit exciting, unusual, and somewhat semi-talented Marines, and
Yep.
you qualify.
All right, I'm in there. I'm in the mix.
So the fun, obviously, is right now, it's been 2 decades since 2003, the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And whenever this airs or whenever people see it, we don't necessarily know, but it's sometime in the future. So it's easily been 2 decades.
At least.
So the opportunity to kind of look back on what's gone on from a farther distance, creates an amazing perspective. But you even have a farther look back than most because you see from a much higher position as in your years in the Corps and your years with tanks. So some of the stuff that I'd love to hear about is when you think back on tanks and you think back of the sort of the nostalgia, but the love and the camaraderie that went along with that and what made that special. What are some of the thoughts that you get when you reminisce about tanks? What is it about tankers that makes them so special for you?
But you're a mobile fire team that you can do more death and destruction on the battlefield in a couple minutes than a whole infantry company can do all day. You know, knowing that you have that ability. Being a former infantryman, I appreciate tanks even more because I don't have to carry my pack. I could just put it on the tank. But I was going to be a tanker since I was 5 years old. That was what I want to do. I want to go to combat in tanks. And so I ended up joining the Marine Corps, not knowing that they even had tanks. Joined it by accident. Going down to tell the recruiter, my battle buddy friend Dwayne, that for the Marines to quit bugging him about coming to the Marines. And as soon as I walked in the recruiting office, it was a Air Force on the right and Marines on the left. And staring us in the face was this big poster of an M48 going through a mud bog and the driver in the hatch. And I just looked over at the staff sergeant. I said, "You guys have tanks?" He goes, "Well, yes, we do." And that was it. That's when That's when I ended up signing up to go be a Marine tanker. Well, I signed up to be a tanker, but I ended up in the infantry when I initially got in. But we fixed it later.
Right.
But just being bonding, with the four guys, you're on that tank, and it's kind of difficult when you're especially like once you become a tank commander, because now you have NCOs dealing with non-rates, or if you're a platoon sergeant, you're a staff NCO dealing with non-rates, and especially for officers, it must be difficult because that difference of the rank structure kind of goes away.
So your first time in a tank in preparation for combat was not in 03.
No,
What was that like for you?
going back to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and it's funny that somebody else who's in this outfit that I was just thinking of this last night after we parted company. I was thinking of the Marines in the battalion, First Tank Battalion, who had seen combat before 2003. And that was Master Sergeant Scott Martin, myself, Master Gunnery Sergeant Frank Castillo, and Master Gunnery Sergeant Guadalupe Denigen, who was the maintenance chief.
Wow.
But going back to Desert Storm time frame, well, Desert Shield happened first, and that was the big wait. I mean, not just Kuwait, but the waiting for things to happen, waiting for the buildup. And we were just over there living like dogs on in tanks, out in the field, living off your tank. And but for me, I'd come off the drill field and gone to third tanks at 29 Palms. And so I knew I was a good Marine. Honestly, thought I was. And but the big thing for me was we got closer to crossing line of departure. For if you've never been in combat or been shot at, you always wonder, how am I going to perform? Am I going to do what I'm supposed to do? And so there's this big, especially the staff NCO, nobody had been to combat, and you wonder if you're going to perform as advertised once the shooting starts. And that was the big thing, wondering. But I just know my platoon, we drilled all the time. Our crew drills, crew maintenance. And Saddam left us in the sand too long. If you would have come across the border in August or September, all the Saudis would be speaking Arabic. But he let us sit over there and get good. That's what happened. He let us get good. And plus 29 Palms tankers, they were always cut above because we spend 280 days out in the field every year. We was out in the field 280 days doing our job. Whereas if you're in first or second tanks, you might get out to the field maybe 80 days a year. And we'd support everything that came along, TACP shoots. We were just good at tanking. That's the bottom line. Third tanks was a tankers battalion.
So many people don't really understand or appreciate how many Marines does it take to make a tank work? As in the crew and then the support.
I think to make a tank work in combat, we did the numbers once, and I've heard different studies by the Marine Corps and Army when I was teaching at the Army schools and going to Army schools. But it takes about 20 to 25 personnel to get a tank to cross a line of departure, because you got ammo techs, you got truck drivers, you got cooks, you got the comm techs, supply guys, the maintenance people, and then just all those personnel it takes. I mean, that's why the motor T is so big, because I know my motor tragedy Marines will be glad that I'm thinking of them, because without them, nothing happens. They're the ones that drive the fuel, drive the ammo, drive the parts, or take you back to the rear to get a shower. Then some truck drivers, they're the unsung heroes. They get abused too.
Sure.
You know how many Marines go fit in a 5-ton? Well, if you ask one of the drivers, she'll always tell you one more top.
That's a good answer. So for those that don't know, give me the crew positions on the tank and paint a little bit of the complexity of the orchestration of that dance, just to be able to get the tank to move, shoot, and communicate.
To be able to shoot, move, and communicate, first you got to have all your workup training. But you start off, you have the driver. He's down there in the hull all by himself. The loader, the gunner, and tank commander up in the turret. And basically the driver is isolated from the rest of the crew by a turret basket. All he has is his comm set. So he's got to be the eyes between the fenders. He's got that 170-degree view and 6 or 7 degrees up and down. And it's surprising. Like when in Desert Storm, my driver picked out more targets than the rest of us because he had such a limited field of view, and he was focused on it, and he was calling stuff out left and right. Whereas the rest of us, the gunner, he's just looking down his auxiliary sight, or myself and the loader up looking around. But the driver only had a finite amount of space to look out of. He was finding more stuff. So the driver's down there. He's hopefully you've had him long enough to where he knows when you tell him, or he can sometimes even anticipate what you're going to tell him to do, like go right, go left. Some drivers, when you have it a long time, they kind of have that inherent ability to kind of sense what you're thinking, or they'll listen to the radios and hear about the company moving left or right, and they'll start adjusting on their own. They'll look out their vision block and see the wing tank starting to move. Desert Storm was difficult because we only had 2 radio frequencies for the company,
right?
Because there's so many units in theater. So we got to be where we could look over another tank and we'd know to go left or right.
Mm-hmm.
But the driver gets to get the tank going, and he knows when to, or if he hears a fire command going out, he knows he's going to be looking for a hold down position, or he's going to be coming to a short halt, depending on if the tank is, full up or not. As long as he knows, just like anything else, what's commander's intent, what's our end state, and counting on a driver to better look left and right and keep station, so you don't have to keep telling him, hey, move left, because you're starting to converge. So it's good to have a driver that will be aware and look over there and see how his station keeping is, and maintain his position in formation. And a lot of people, I was different. When I got a new Marine, out of Fort Knox, I didn't throw him down in the driver's hole on a first op if I could. Now, it happened, but I would rather take that driver and throw him in the loader's hatch for the first couple ops so he can see how the rest of the crew operates.
Mm.
Then he can go downstairs and start being the driver.
Mm.
So, but in Desert Storm, we're kind of, some platoons had a heavy rank structure, and some platoons had a light, non-standard rank structure. And it also got to be where maybe the best guy for the job wasn't the senior guy.
Mm.
So anyway, the driver's down there. He's critical. Hopefully you have somebody who can take initiative. He knows how to keep station, or he can listen to the radios and understand what, the company's getting ready to come to phase line. We're going to stop here. He knows that. Next Marine up there is the loader. He's your other sets of eyes and ears. And he's just like the tank commander. He's up there looking around for targets. He's got his sector, off from the right front of the tank over to the left rear, and hopefully he's looking for things that are happening, or if something's going on and you're talking to somebody on the radios, like higher, like you talk to the platoon or the company, he'll get on the intercom and talk to the driver, and he'll direct the driver for you, so you're not sitting there having to key back and forth. So loaders are critical, and also they keep the gun fed.
And not just the main gun.
That's right. They keep the coax machine gun in operation. And in Desert Storm, that was a challenge because we were operating with the M60 E2 machine gun, which only the Marine Corps had it. And it was our coax machine gun, and it was mounted at an angle. And if you didn't, and also with the barrel extension and the gas tube extension, if you didn't know what you were doing when you zeroed the machine gun, you'd actually warp it because of the way the mount was. It was you had to follow it. One of the things, you need to follow the TM. You can't just slap it in there and think it's going to shoot. And so he make sure the coax is being fed. He also the radios. We had the 2 RT-240 or RT-246 receiver transmitter and 2 receivers. So he would be down there. He's the guy that you would have change radio frequencies, even though the tank commander had what we call a Charlie box on the side. But he had a good loader. He would know, if you tell him, roll it to company, roll it to battalion. So he'd be down there flipping it. And we always like to monitor higher. So by the time it got down to us through the company, we already knew what was going on. So we always have one receiver set for higher. So when you hear battalion give the company orders, and we already knew what we were going to do.
And by the way, what battalion were you involved with?
3rd Tank Battalion.
3rd Tank Battalion in Desert Storm.
For Desert Storm. They were out of 29 Palms, California. We were RCT-7. We were the flyaway battalion. So all of our tanks were what they called Slick 60s. They didn't have any explosive reactive armor because our tanks were never supposed to go outside the country. Our tanks were all on maritime preposition ships over there. And that's what we drew our tanks off of.
And how different were the tanks from the time that you were in Desert Storm to the time that the Marines hit at OIF?
Well, we went through that transition where we changed from an MSgt-A1 with passive sights and reactive armor, and we went to the M1A1 with thermal sights, laser rangefinder. So instead of being a DAT, a dumbass tanker, we became computerized dumbass tankers. We became CDATs. Yeah, that's how we became.
So now as we cross over into the gunner and tank commander, what did that new capability really bring to the table when it came time to acquire targets and engage?
Well, we just turned the tank into a 24-hour tank, which the enemy today still doesn't understand that. Anybody we encounter does not understand that we own the night. And especially now with the, drones, and you can get feed from upstairs, sent right down to the tank showing you what's ahead. But in Desert Storm, we had passive sites that rely on starlight. So like when we got up to the Al-Wafra oil fields, where at noon, it was like midnight because they lit all the oil fields on fire. And I remember they were sending out illumination rounds. This is the daytime illumination rounds, and all of a sudden you hear it shot out, and you hear it pop, and it looked like somebody punched a pinhole through a piece of black cardboard. That's all it was, an illumination round.
Yep.
Which normally would light up everything super bright. So we couldn't see, we could hear stuff out there. That's when I became a big fan of the tow system because they had thermals, and they snuggled in up against us, and they were up there shooting Iraqi tanks that we could not even acquire. We could hear them, but we couldn't see them. But the tow guys they remember that's back when the tow system was mounted on just a Humvee, a plain old Humvee, not an armored Humvee, just.
So in a crew, obviously, as a crew develops, who's the person responsible for generally picking those positions on a tank? Does the tank commander get the opportunity to kind of choose from the crowd? Is it like picking teams and you get to pick your driver, your loader, your tank commander, or is it like you get to move up and you move up and out?
The platoon sergeant is like your first sergeant of the platoon or your sergeant major of the platoon. He does all the enlisted personnel assignments. That's what the platoon sergeant does. So you know as a platoon sergeant who your strong people are, who your weak people are, and you assign them as you see fit. And then sometimes in third tanks, it was very rare to get an NCO check in. All of our NCOs were homegrown. They were all homegrown. So they went from being drivers to loaders, or loaders to drivers, depending on how the platoon sergeant saw fit to do it, to the gunner position. And then usually you would want to put your one of your strongest gunner NCOs on the lieutenant's tank, because he's going to be lost in the sauce. He's coming from school and he's got a lot to learn. So you want somebody there that can make sure a gunner on a lieutenant's tank is like a tank commander junior. Because as soon as lieutenant, what happens every time we stop? What do they do? Got to go to a meeting.
Right.
Got to go to a meeting. So that gunner becomes basically the tank commander. Make sure all the maintenance gets done and that the other two Marines are taken care of. Yeah, the lieutenant's, same with on a company commander's tank. We always, in a company as tank leader, you made sure in headquarters platoon that strong NCOs were the gunners for the captain and for the XO.
So what skill set does that gunner have to develop to really be good? Obviously, when you get put in the seat, you're not automatically good. It's going to take a little bit of time for you to be able to really work out how do you best perform in that role. And that's not just, as you mentioned, just pulling the trigger, but it's everything as you're assisting the rest of that crew. So how much time does it typically take before a gunner really becomes sort of, very, very good at what he does?
That depends on the individual, and it also depends on who's bringing them up,
Mm.
who's doing the training, how much they're doing with them. I've seen people go their whole 4 years and never get past the gunner seat because they're pretty good at gunners, but once you put them in the seat, situational overload. But I've seen other guys that they're quite comfortable. They could be a driver 3 or 4 months. All of a sudden they're in the gunner seat, maybe for a couple of gunneries, and boom, they're tank commanders. They pick it up real quick. Um, I went from being when I first went to tanks from the infantry, I was a sergeant. I was a buck sergeant. So I came from 2-5. Give an example. I went over to tank battalion. So in the barracks, I was an infantry sergeant. I was King Kong in the barracks. I was, because we knew how to field day. You did that because we didn't have tanks to work on. But then when we'd go to the ramp, all of a sudden I was a PFC. Put on my coveralls and I was up there. So my tank commander was a sergeant, and I was a sergeant. So I was a loader to a sergeant tank commander. And that's why I started learning. And then once he saw that I kind of knew, plus, I've been wanting to be a tank since I was a kid, a tank crewman, go to tanks in combat. I've been studying tanks, since I was a kid. I build models of tanks, watching armored movies, reading books about armor. I kind of knew how it worked. And therefore, then we're out in the field for all of a sudden they're like, we're going to put everybody in different hatches. We're doing a field exercise. So I went from the loader's hatch over to the tank commander's hatch, and we're going to do a delay and defend. And I knew how to do all that. And the lieutenant's like, where'd you learn all that? I go, I've been wanting to be a tanker since I was a kid. So it seems kind of simple. It's the same thing you do in infantry. If you gotta bound back, you just have somebody provide fire, and then the other section moves, and that section fires, and the other guys move. Only now we're doing it on tanks, and we don't have to have packs on our back. I like it.
Awesome. So the additional challenge, what's really brought to the table with the additional challenge of being a tank commander, as opposed to, obviously you got to understand the rest of the positions, the rest of the tank, but what would you say the big leap is to be able to effectively perform in the tank commander seat?
So making that leap to become a tank commander, you just, now you have Marines you're responsible for. So now you have your 3 Marines. So it's just like being a fighter team leader, no different than when you're in the grunts. But now you've got all these weapons you got to take care of. Now you got 3 other pistols you're responsible for, the M16 on the tank, all the sensitive items, the crypto gear, night vision equipment, the health and welfare of those 3 Marines. And now you got to take care of this. You're responsible for this tank. You're responsible that has a main gun and a couple of machine guns and vision systems. It's just, and you have to be able to know where to go look in the book, to do the stuff. And make sure that that's how you supervise the Marines. I always was like, get the book out. Well, we've done this 100 times. Get the book out. Go through the steps. There'll be a time where you can do it without the book. But if the book is available, let's go by the book and especially so you don't want to get anybody hurt.
Sure.
People try to take shortcuts, and that's when you get jarheads hurt, and then it's not fun. You got to fill out paperwork.
So back in LAVs, there was a strong foundation in terminology and the way that things would move from even the old cavalry days.
Mm-hmm.
So the terms and some of the ways that you maneuver and bounding overwatch and all the different techniques and tactics, stick with your wingman and echelon right and massive firepower. It's all the same stuff from a grunt, how you patrol and where you displace your weapons. But what is interesting from a tank commander's perspective is how much latitude do tankers have as in controlling their own tanks versus they're tied to a bigger combat VW on inline. How much autonomousness does that section have to be able to go and perform a particular mission that might only take a couple of tanks?
Well, it's crosstalk, just like anything else. It's crosstalk between and nowadays, it's was had a lieutenant and his wingman, I had a platoon sergeant and his wingman. So there was a level of experience there, and hopefully you've been in training enough with each other to you can almost like my wingman in Desert Storm. I would think something he was doing it. We'd been together in 29 Palms so long, and then we sit out there in that desert, went on all these operations. But a section of tanks can take off and go off and do whatever they need to do. Depends on what kind of. I never was involved in any MOUT training or urban training, and I know those guys reinvented the book. Basically, I remember taking my old MOUT books, my MCI courses from the 70s, and I took them to 29 Palms and gave them to Marines because all of a sudden now they're fighting in urban combat, and we hadn't done that for so long. But I'd done it in the MSgt Mike. We'd go to combat town and practice, military operations, urban terrain, and that skill got lost kind of. And then it got reinvented in 2003 when all of a sudden we're in big cities and towns and going forward. But I remember taking my MCI courses out 29 Palms and giving them to the guys because they're like, "Hey, Top, where do we find this stuff?" And I'm like, "I brought them books."
As you step off of that tank commander, now let's as you break out to that next level of the ability that the tanks are participating in. Tanks don't operate alone. Tanks usually operate with other the rest of a team.
Or a minimum of one, a wingman.
So the bridge was perfect with regard to all of that training wove together. There's a lot of intelligence. There's a lot of sharp decision makers, but there's also a tremendous amount of we've trained for this, and that training for this is almost a worst case scenario. CAX is this big. We need this and this and this and this and this, and it actually happened when we had to cross the bridge into Baghdad.
Going across the Diyala River was just like being out at a trainer there in 29 Palms. It was just a different kind of obstacle. Instead of crossing a big giant anti-tank ditch, we're crossing a big old river. All that CAX training on the combined arms exercises at 29 Palms, it just paid great dividends because when we come upon an obstacle, the line charges, our blade tanks are we didn't have blade tanks yet. We had the plow tanks. We didn't have blade tanks yet. Yeah, it's one thing we lost when we got the M1A1. We didn't have a blade tank anymore. But that we fixed that after OIF, after 003. But yeah, everything crossing that river was just everything like we've been trying to do. Just like when we did resupply, same way we resupplied. Log pack would come up, get just tank leaders would pick up the log pack, go set up their company log pack, and then once it was done, everybody gathered back at a certain place and they'd take it back to the field trains. And then from the field trains, they'd take it back to the next echelon of logistics and top off the fuel, top off the ammo, top off the chow, top off the water, and get ready for the next exercise. The line charges, I don't know how many line charges I've seen go off in my life. Just
CAX, yeah, because CAX would be
and also Desert Storm. We started off, like I say, Saddam left us in the sand too long. We got really, really good at doing breaching. That was like our laboratory to refine what we did. And then we figured out that towed MICLICs were not good to have behind tanks because when we back up, we wad it up into a big old vault.
Is that how they were deployed back in the day?
They wanted us, and they wanted to bring these trailer mounted MICLICs out and put them behind tanks, and the tanks would come up. And first time we wadded a couple of them up, backing up, trying to back the tank up. You can't, you're buttoned up, and they're like, and we had told them, we said, this isn't a good idea. A trailer behind a tank. I said, oh yeah, we're going to try it. All right, we'll try it. So after we ruined a couple of them, code H'd them, as we say, and then they decided they would be behind Amtraks. So initially we had those line charges behind Amtraks and trailers. They weren't all stacked up in those tubs inside. So. Yeah, but that river crossing, that was just like going to a CAX, only with a place that smelled bad and had flies and had a river instead of a tank ditch, you know? That's what it was like. Everybody done it before. We'd practice it down in Kuwait before we went north. We practiced, you know, doing breaching. And then luckily we got Staff Sergeant Timmy Duvall came over from the schoolhouse, and he had been the ALBB instructor over at Fort Knox. And he came over, and we had all these AVLBs, and the AVLB was always the bastard piece of equipment in a tank company, you know, because it took 2 Marines, and it was a one of a kind thing, a hydraulic beast, and we never really had enough manpower to, you know, keep them fully manned, even though it was only 2 people. But Timmy come over, we finally got enough Marines to dedicate to those vehicles, and then he did all the training. He trained all them AVLBs for a couple of days. I remember out there, launch and recover, launch and recover, launch and recover. And as a reward, he got to go to Bravo Company and be the 3rd tank in a headquarters platoon. But he trained up all those AVLB guys, Timothy Duvall, and that was key to crossing.
Yeah,
it was key to crossing that
and
river.
first time in history
Oh yeah,
where a opposed crossing where an AVLB was used to be able to make that happen. That hadn't been done before.
No, and then yeah, it was a very very historical thing, and it worked. And that's because of training at CAX and guys like Timothy Duvall. He was staff sergeant at the time, coming from Fort Knox, and he'd been the AVLB instructor back there, so he trained up everybody in our battalion, all of our operators. So they're really good when they left.
So as you look at the operation was a feint at first. It was a feint. It was supposed to be we got to put on a big show, like we're going to go here, attract some attention so that we can pull some eyeballs and pull some guns.
Yeah, get their
this
assets,
way.
yeah.
And then and another unit was going to be able to have the main crossing opportunity, but then it flipped. It changed. The momentum changed. And as you describe it, how did you find out about that, and sort of how did you feel about that when the word came down, like, hey, you know what, we're gonna do a feint. We're gonna press on. We're gonna press through this. We started the feint, and now it's time to go. How did you feel about that?
I mean, I've been monitoring higher traffic and knew that 3-4, which is where Bravo Company was, they were having issues, and the bridges down there that were tank capable were gone, and there was only a infantry bridge, and so they were supposed to shoot across and get on the far side south of Rashid Airfield, where we did that candy cane going up north, and we were supposed to go up there to the Diyala River crossing, and luckily they had only blown up part of the bridge. There's still enough on each side. I mean, we were going to get across one way or another, but we just fortunate there was enough bridge on each side to put that AVLB across. And then I think down there in 3-4 where Bravo Company was, they ended up pontooning their tanks over later. But then, yeah, we became the focus effort. And the Alpha Company was up north with, I believe, 3-7, and they came in from the northeast. But yeah, that's how it is. You just situation changes. So, all right, we're it. I remember we did a resupply and refuel. We've been sitting there all night shooting back and forth across that river, and came back, got everybody up armed and refueled, and went did it.
So with your experience as an instructor to not only the officers, but obviously a mainstay in the educational process, and you knew a lot of these guys personally, you knew the tank commanders and the tanks. How did you feel as that one of the senior most men when you got a chance to see them perform in this, in essence, like a Super Bowl of something, the training all kind of comes together? How did that make you feel to see this whole operation happening, where your guys now are it's going to happen with your guys?
How do you feel? When it's happening, you don't really feel any awe or anything. You just know that you're hoping nobody gets hurt.
Mm-hmm.
You want to lose anybody, as first thing, because I did know them. I got on every tank and interacted with every crewman before we went up. That's just how I am. Uh, just to make sure that their tank was keeping it in serviceable condition, and with how the personnel were doing. And but when it was happening, I didn't really think about it. It wasn't until we got over there by Rashid Airfield, and then it's like, wow, that was pretty awesome. You start thinking about it. But I had no doubt the guys would do what they needed to do. They just needed opportunity to do it. And I mean, any mission you give those guys, they're going to make it happen. That's how we are. We just don't not let it happen.
So one of the things that Captain Matt Watt mentioned was the tactically a missed opportunity for the enemy when they put a minefield, blown bridge, another minefield. They put the second minefield really far away, and it wasn't pressed right up against the edge, further choking the ground that you could have taken up, and it was pushed back quite a bit. So not necessarily like everything wasn't against the effort. There were some breaks that kind of came that made it a little bit easier to get across, a little bit easier to maneuver, to get a little bit of a base to be able to pull the AVLBs up, be able to do the job. So again, you can't always predict how smart the enemy is going to be, and in some cases, some would call it luck. We got lucky that if they had pressed their tactics a little better, we would have had a lot harder time to get across that bridge if that minefield had been right up
the one on the far side,
right up on the edge. So as you look back again, as you talk to other guys, or as you get a chance to kind of look back through history, and you were part of that, and your ability, your whole team, because again, it's not just one guy.
Effort. Yep.
That team effort. How do you look back upon that when you talk to other people who aren't quite familiar with the tactical significance of that bridge?
Well, just let them know that we're very fortunate that when they blew their own bridges up, that they didn't do a very good job of it. I mean, and we're also lucky that our own Air Force or Marine Corps Aviation didn't take them out either. That was a big thing. The Marines could have come in. There's a bridge. They only got half of it. We'll get the rest of it. Let's head back to the club. Yeah, we're Winston. We're going back. Yeah. So, no, it's just. I mean, if there's some way that we couldn't have gone across that bridge because of that minefield being in a different position, then you know what? Engineers up.
Figure it out.
We would have called them up and got us some rubber boats or whatever, and done something like pushed engineers and grunts across the river and go manually clear the landfill.
Wow.
I mean, I remember when I got across over there, I was just with our engineer Gunny, just looking at the bridge, and then start following the wires. And we went and found Half-Head Bob, who had the detonator for the other charge, but he got coax. I forget, it's either Penyak or somebody else. I can't remember who. They were fighting over who got Half-Head Bob with the burst of coax and knocked him out. But we were over there just kicking mines off the road with our feet, because they're obviously made for anti-tank, so a little boot pressure ain't gonna do nothing. So yeah, we would have got across. It just would have had to crack that nut a different way and improvise.
So for the position that you were in, the opportunity based on your longevity in the unit and really understanding the unit, and how many people in your position are there in that whole division? If you think about the person who is the greater degree of significance based on experience, and you were at a place in that S4 position to be able to take care of a much bigger group of people and really understand their needs and really understand how this whole mechanism works and the importance. And one of the choices that had to be made was, where are the combat trains going to be located? And so how did that decision making come about? And at what point did that really pay dividends when they didn't have to go back? You didn't have to come from way up. You were able to maintain momentum much faster based on a few key decision making choices.
As I told you the other night, that going back to CAX is, and when I became the S4 chief, which unfortunate to have to leave a gun company and go over to battalion. the dreaded S4 chief job. But I already knew from previous experience in Desert Storm that, they wanted the combat trains. The battalion commander at the time, he wanted the combat trains to be back and the S3. And then I had to go back. I literally drove back and got some manuals in the rear. We were out there near Camp Wilson. I brought them back and I showed them, here's how things are going now. Because I just come from the schoolhouse a couple years earlier. So I knew what the different mindset was. And I also related to them the experience in Desert Storm that, as the tanks, as we parted all the bad guys out of the way, and then here comes our soft skins, they close back in on them. And also to get something from the combat trains, they were way the heck back there. You couldn't even see them. So I encouraged my battalion commander, let's have the combat trains be up closer where they can respond and be more reactive. And also if they're threatened, it won't be that hard to bring some assets back to extricate them from whatever poo they got into. So that's how we ended up doing it. I don't know how they did it after I left. Plus, after I left, all the big blue arrow stuff went away. It all became about, fighting infidels, or us infidels fighting them over there in the cities and the villages. So the big maneuver stuff went away. Same, everybody went to Afghanistan. It was all just, small ops, but that CAC style stuff, which is what OIF was, it was a CAC style operation. It's exactly what we've been training for decades. And we went and did it.
So who is your counterpart and how did you guys work together?
Oh, Ruben. Oh, we had been in Fort Knox. We were together in an armor officer basic course. He was one of the cadre officers. I was in a different cadre. Myself and there's two gunnies, myself and a gunnery sergeant Mike Williams. We were over there. But anyway, I worked with Ruben there. We were at the detachment. But when we got to the battalion, I was Charlie Company tank leader and he was Bravo Company commander. And then, unfortunately, we both had to leave a tank company, a gun company, and go to the battalion. But we had a great working relationship because I knew he was competent, and I think he figured I was competent, and I knew what I was doing, and he knew I cared. And but he also knew I was a student of the art, everything about tanks. I was, not only, I'd come up through the ranks, and one of the first master gunners to come out of the schoolhouse back there for the M1A1. And then even as a tank leader, before I went to battalion, I went and took a crew downrange and qualified so I could walk across the street with some MOS credibility that, yeah, I can not only, be a mess sergeant, but I can tank. Not as good as Troy Yates later, where he went over there and he was a section leader as a mess sergeant. I'm a little jelly him about that. He went over there. He got promoted to master sergeant in Iraq, and he was a section leader. So him and his other tank are off somewhere, and the lieutenant, his tank are off somewhere else. So he got overpaid for a while, in my words. But Ruben and I, we worked great. I mean, he knew that he knew that I wasn't gonna let stuff fall through the cracks, and I knew that he would go up to higher up and make sure if we needed something or if we needed something fixed, that he would speak up for us. Not like some people just rubber stamp whatever comes down from higher. He would, and plus he and I we made the combat trains into a unit. We had training with them. We trained them guys just like they're a unit. I had guys, comm guys, motor T, supply cooks. We didn't have, there wasn't anything to cook. So the cooks didn't have nothing to do. But we trained them into a cohesive unit. And then I had, I turned them cooks in a security team. They were our security, EPW teams, such like that. But yeah, we got along great because we'd known each other growing up. We knew each other at the stumps. We knew each other back at Knox. And we both came back to 29 Palms again. And he was in the Bravo and I was in Charlie. And then we both got yanked over to the to battalion headquarters. And yeah.
Well, interestingly, whether you realize it or not, you speak very affectionately about being on a tank. So what's that difference for a tanker to be on a tank versus being in some other other role that might not be on a tank?
Well, you're just you're the biggest, baddest thing on the battlefield. I mean, that's it. You have all that power, and you got you and your crew. You know, you got it's just like I told you earlier. It's like you got a fire team that has a really kick-ass weapon system, and just to have all that power and the ability to, you know, and you're not just looking for tanks. You're looking for anything that's going to hurt the infantry. You know, that's bottom line what we're there for, is to make sure the grunts can do their job, because it takes boots on the ground. But it takes smash mouth football via tanks to make it happen. And that's what we bring to the table, smash mouth football. As General Conway and eloquently put it, you know, General Conway, his division CG, and come up. But just being on a tank and having that crew, and then you got your wingman, and then you look over and there's the other section, and like these 4 tanks. What can we not do on this battlefield? I mean, we could talk. We got laser rangefinders. We have thermal sights, and just a feeling of, I guess it's kind of like what a fighter pilot has, only it's you and 3 other people on the tank. You're a machine. You're part of the machine. That's the bottom line. It's you're one with the machine. You know, you gave it a name. You know, it's got a moniker on the bore evacuator. You know, and usually it's something that, you know, the crew came up with, or maybe not. But yeah, it's your beast. You know, and tanks get their names from different things, but usually it's a crew thing. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes depending on tank commander, or it might be an incident that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens, but just being on a tank, though, it's like I said, I want to do it since I was 5 years old. I wanted to go to combat on a tank, and after Desert Storm, I was like, shit, I can die now. I've done everything I want to do. You know, I went to combat on a tank, and I came back.
So that's a great tiny segue. What are you doing now? Since you've had a career doing the thing that you've always wanted to do, you've accomplished that. You've checked that very big box. It's a very big part of who you are. What do you find that you enjoy doing now? What are you doing now?
Well, for a living, I mean, you retire from the Marine Corps, but you don't retire from life.
Right.
You know, everybody thinks you retire from the Marine Corps and you just go and goof off, but you still got bills to pay, mouths to feed. So, but I've reinvented myself several times. I could have gone into the military industrial complex and been on the government teat, as they say, but I elected not to do that. Went out to the private sector, and once I retired, got home, took about a year off to decompress and figure stuff out, and then end up going into working with a construction company, doing site surveys, sales, ordered materials, site plans, pulling permits, and then economy started getting goofy there around 08, 09. If you remember the troubled assets relief plan, or whatever it was, TARP, where they were giving money away to all the Wall Street guys. And so the company, he got weird about the company and wrapped his hands around it. So I was sitting in my hands. I couldn't make any decisions. It's like some staff NCOs I met when I showed up to Charlie Company in 1998. You know, they were very micromanaged. Then went and one of my Marines from OIF, pre-OIF, he had gotten out in 2002, because he's like, oh, we're never going to go to combat. I mean, we will. Just hold on. I'm telling you, we're going to go back up there. You know, we left it undone. So he got out. He got a pretty good job and working on the rails. And then I was getting ready to go work for General Dynamics Arabia Limited, and they were delaying that contract and kept delaying it. And I was using my truck to do yard work and hauling junk, you know, to make some scratch. And he said, hey, they're going to be hiring a couple of technicians. I said, okay, what do I do? Well, here's the website. Just go look, you know, and maybe you can apply. So luckily I had a friend a policeman, his wife was an HR lady, and she told me, hey, look at the job description and then put those words in your resume. So I'm like, cool. So, but whatever. But I did have you know, because of being a tank Marine, I did have a hydraulic experience, electrical experience, you know, and plus my work in into construction, I had to use computers and stuff. So all that stuff they're looking for. So I ended up, getting a job on the rails. The company had the contract for the to operate the Federal Railroad Administration's survey cars, Office of Safety survey cars. So I spent 6 years with a backpack going around to every state, being on the rails in every state. And then about 6 years after that, got kind of a little trace of burnout on that, living out of a backpack, being deployed 10 months a year, and then spending 2 months in January and February up in the Ice Age in Pennsylvania. So I decided to come home, and then
And home is where?
home is I'm originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico here, but I had moved my family after we retired out to Rio Rancho, New Mexico. So that's my home. And then anyway, the marriage dissolved, went our separate ways, and so I was having to reinvent myself again. And luckily, the first time when I retired and moved my family out to New Mexico, I had a really Sierra Hotel realtor who, when I would fly into town or drive in with the family or without the family, looking for homes, he had everything lined up, just like a good S4 chief. He had stuff lined up, the schedule, where we're going, where we're gonna, find out what my needs were. But anyway, he was a really good realtor, and no pressure. He got assigned to me by USAA. So I was like, oh, that's cool. And that's originally what I was going to do when I retired. But then I got hired away from that because I bought a building, and I went and saw the guy at the construction company 5 times before I wrote him a check for half. So after he had built our building, he called me up and said, how would you like to go to work? I said, well, I don't need to go. I'm figuring stuff out. So after a couple lunches later, he convinced me that I needed to work at his place. So I went over there, and that's where I worked. But after I had the marriage dissolve, I need to find another place. And this time I had a realtor who was assigned to me by Navy Federal, who happens to work here at Coldwell Banker. So my realtor, she kept me from making stupid decisions. Because I didn't know where I was going to land, how I was going to land, if I was going to land, And so she kept me from buying the wrong house a couple times through her guidance. She could have let me, but she set me down and talked to me. And so after I was looking, what am I going to do now? After I got off the rails and the marriage had dissolved, and those people helped me out twice. They kept me from making stupid decisions. I can help other people do that. So I decided to do. Went and got my realtor license and been at it ever since.
So how long has that been?
I'm on my 4th year.
4th year as a realtor?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a tenure where you're trying to get to a certain level, and where are you in that process?
No, I'm doing usually your 3rd years, they say, is your best, and true to form, my 3rd year. So so I'm not starting my 4th year. I'm about, well, it'll be end of 4 years here in a couple months. But my 3rd year was my best year. You're figuring things out. We're all independent contractors, but I'm in a really good company, Coldwell Bankers Worldwide. And my qualifying broker, who is my supervising broker, we have training here, just like when I was in the Marines. We got training all the time, Monday through Friday. There's training events here, and you want to get good at what you do, you go attend them. You don't have to, because we're all independent contractors, but I go and network with people. And then the hardest part for me is coming back here is getting everybody to understand I'm not the 17-year-old ponytail guy up at the high school that they knew, or I'm not the master sergeant, jarhead that they knew from when I'd come back occasionally. So it's been a thing of getting out there and let everybody know that I'm doing realty now. I'm doing realty now. Or you call somebody up, yeah, we're in a new home. I'm a realtor, right? Oh yeah, that's right, you are. Yeah, okay. So that's been a challenge.
That's awesome.
But I have I've been building up my business, and it's doing good, and I'm looking forward to 2023. It's going to be a better year than my last year, especially getting out of the Wuhan. We had challenges, but lucky my company here, the 2 guys who owned this company, Coldwell Banker Legacy, they're graduates out of high school I graduated from only 2 years later, but they're very proactive in keeping their brokers in the game, and they're down to earth. And I mean, they come around, come to sales meetings where you can call them up and ask them. I mean, they've been doing this stuff since like they started doing realty when they got out of high school, 78, 79. So they got a little bit of experience. And I was fortunate to have a man named Phil Phillips take me under his wing my second year. He's a former Army aviator, and he flew bird dogs in Vietnam. He's a bird dog. In fact, he out there at Double Eagle Airport on the West Mesa, he's got a bird dog just like the one he flew in Nam, radios, M4 carbine, couple of Willie Pete rockets under each wing. It looks just like he could go fly, you know, they're dummy rockets, of course. But yeah, he's got that bird dog out there. But he's also got another plane. But he'd been doing realty 48 years. So he took me under his wing at his 46th year. And so he brought me in on a lot of deals and really helped me. And he's just such a wealth of knowledge, him and his wife both. And now he spends his time between here and Salida. So when he has deals going on, he brings me on, and you know, we end up splitting the deals. And then I end up finding other persons to help, you know, through him as he's trying to back away from his business. I'm absorbing some of it. So I've been blessed to have, just like when I was, you know, in the Marines, I always had somebody looking out for me every time, just like getting from infantry over to tanks. You know, I had somebody looking out for me, you know, that made things right. The Marine Corps said, we're going to do this. And then they didn't. And then first sergeant and a captain make it right. Boom, all of a sudden. And when I got out of the Marine Corps in 79, went back in 84, supposed to go back into tanks, but couldn't because I was going back in as a PFC instead of a staff sergeant select, like when I got out in 79. And, had a first sergeant and a major Bancroft took care of me and got me back over to tanks where I belong. And so always had people looking out for me. And you know, when I was in the East Coast and second tanks, and my first sergeant, he's like, we got to get you got to catch up with your peers. You know, you got out for almost 5 years and we got to get caught up with all. So you need to go drill field or recruiting. I said, oh. He said, let me tell you about it. So he told me about it. He'd been both. So you want to go dig the ore and find the ore and then have to ship the ore to the mill, or you want to be at the mill and make steel? I said, I want to make steel. So he
Never heard it put like that. That's a great way to describe it.
It's great. Yeah, First Sergeant Joe was his name. He was an A6 avionics first sergeant, and he took care of me, and he got me in front of a drill instructor screening team. And so I was like, oh, I guess I go to Paris Island. He goes, why? I go, why? I got accepted. Those guys are from Paris Island. He goes, no, you just been accepted by a drill instructor screening team. You can go to San Diego. You just got to ask. Okay, so I asked. So I want to go back to the West Coast, and got me out to the West Coast. Yeah, and then I got to see him a couple years later when the tank company was out at CAX at Camp Wilson. So I drove up from San Diego as a drill instructor, you know, to go see him for one thing, and then also, you know, other guys I'd been in the company with were up there. So it's pretty neat. First Sergeant Joe, A6. He looked like Idi Amin. And he spoke like Sylvester the Cat. And we would all chuckle whenever he was reading a promotional. Well, you can edit that part out. I'm just,
All right, hold on a quick second.
First Sergeant Joe was he was a good guy.
Throughout history,
the Marine Corps has responded
to the crises of the nation.
We have always been most ready.
when our country was least ready.
Marine Corps is just to fight.
and since 1775,
We have fulfilled that role with honor.
Courage.
And commitment.
Today, we pause to renew our promise to America.
your Marines will always be there.
When you need us.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.